At Christmas dinner last year, in front of my husband's entire family, my mother-in-law literally moved me out of every single family photo they were taking. When I tried to step back in, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "These photos are for real family only." The whole dining room heard it. Everyone just stood there, silent. But before I could even process what had happened, my 12-year-old son Marcus walked over to his grandfather, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and said something that made the patriarch of the family go completely white. Yeah, that really happened, and it changed our lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Let me take you back to that moment, because this story isn't just about one humiliating evening. It's about years of subtle rejection, about what happens when people underestimate the quiet observers in the room, and about how sometimes the most powerful truths come from the smallest voices. I'm Elena Rodriguez, 38 years old, and I married into what I thought was going to be my dream family. The Worthington family. Old money Boston, generational wealth, the kind of people who have family crests and country club memberships passed down like heirlooms. My husband James is the youngest of 3 sons, and when we met 5 years ago at a medical conference, I'm a pediatric nurse, he's a cardiologist, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. James is nothing like his family. He chose medicine over the family investment firm. He drives a used Honda instead of a BMW. He fell in love with a first-generation Mexican-American woman from East LA who worked her way through nursing school while raising her son as a single mother. To him, my background was proof of my strength. To his family, it was proof I didn't belong. Marcus is my everything. I had him when I was 25, fresh out of nursing school, after his father walked out the moment he learned I was pregnant. From day one, it was just Marcus and me against the world. I worked double shifts at the hospital while he did homework in the break room. I saved every penny for his taekwondo classes and math tutoring. We lived in a tiny apartment above a taqueria, in Boyle Heights, but we had each other. And somehow that was enough. Marcus isn't just smart. He's observant in ways that sometimes unnerve me. He notices everything. The way people's voices change when they're being fake. The way they look at me differently when they find out I'm a single mom. He started asking me about microaggressions before he even knew what the word meant. "Mom, why did that lady ask if you spoke English when you were literally speaking English the whole time?" He sees the world with this clarity that adults lose somewhere along the way. When James and I met, Marcus was 7. James didn't try to be his dad right away. He earned it. He showed up to Marcus's tournaments, helped with science projects, taught him chess on quiet Sunday mornings. Marcus was the one who told me I should marry James. "He makes you laugh again, Mom, and he doesn't try to change us." Out of the mouths of babes. But James's family was a different story entirely. William Worthington III, the patriarch, inherited his grandfather's shipping fortune and multiplied it 10 times over. He's the kind of man who still calls business associates by their last names and thinks diversity means hiring someone from Connecticut instead of Massachusetts. His wife Victoria, my mother-in-law, grew up in Beacon Hill society. She speaks 4 languages and knows the proper fork for every course, but somehow never learned basic human decency. Then there's Richard, the eldest son, who followed Daddy into the family business and acts like he invented commerce. His wife Caroline treats charity work like a competitive sport. Whoever raises more money for the museum gala wins. They have 2 kids, perfect little prep school products who call me Miss Elena, even though I'm their aunt. The middle son is Thomas, the golden boy. Harvard Law, partner at a white shoe firm, married to a woman whose family tree connects to 3 presidents. Their daughter Sophia is Marcus's age, and she's actually sweet when the adults aren't around. But in family settings, she's been trained to maintain the hierarchy. And then there's James, the black sheep who became a doctor. Instead of a businessman, who married beneath his station and dared to love my son like his own. From the very first family dinner I attended, the message was clear. You're tolerated, not welcomed. They'd ask about my little boy like Marcus was some distant relation. They'd compliment my English with surprise, as if they expected broken sentences. Victoria would introduce me to their friends as James's wife, with a pause that somehow conveyed disappointment. But the photo thing started early and got worse over time. At family gatherings, they'd take dozens of pictures. Christmas, morning, Easter brunch, summer barbecues. At first, they'd include me but position me at the edge, making it easy to crop me out later. Then they started taking just family shots after the inclusive ones, with me standing awkwardly to the side, holding the camera. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. Mom, why aren't you in the pictures they put on Grandpa's Facebook? I'd make excuses. Oh, honey, I probably blinked. I'll get copies of the good ones. But Marcus wasn't buying it. He'd started taking his own pictures at family events, candid shots of all of us together, creating his own version of family memories. The exclusion wasn't just about photos, it was about everything. They'd plan family vacations and forget to include us in the group chat. They'd have impromptu gatherings and mention them in front of us like we should have somehow known. Victoria would talk about the family in ways that clearly drew a circle around me and Marcus. James tried to address it, but his approach was always diplomatic, always giving them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was just an oversight. You know how Mom is with technology. They're old-fashioned, but they mean well. I appreciated that he tried, but I also knew he'd never fully understand what it felt like to be perpetually othered by people who were supposed to be your family. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus, though, he understood. He'd come home from Worthington gatherings exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with running around their estate. Mom, do you think they'll ever really like us? He asked after one particularly tense dinner. I didn't know how to answer that honestly without breaking his heart or making him bitter. The thing about being excluded is that it's death by 1,000 cuts. No single incident is big enough to call out without seeming dramatic. But collectively, they form a weight that settles on your chest and makes it hard to breathe in those spaces. I started dreading family events, making excuses to stay home. But Marcus loved his dad, because that's what James became. His dad in every way that mattered. And he wanted to be part of that family, even when they made it clear we were outsiders. The Christmas that changed everything started like all the others. Victoria had insisted on her usual formal dinner at the family estate. 22 people seated around their antique dining table, with place cards that somehow always put Marcus and me at the far end, away from the core family. The house was decorated like something out of Architectural Digest. 12-foot tree, fresh garland, more poinsettias than a greenhouse. Marcus had been quiet during the drive over, fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket. You okay, baby? I asked. He nodded but didn't make eye contact. Just thinking about stuff. When we arrived, the usual dance began. Air kisses from Victoria that didn't quite connect. Handshakes from William that lasted exactly 3 seconds. The cousins running off to play while Marcus hung back with James and me, unsure of his place in the hierarchy. Dinner was the typical affair. Expensive wine, multiple courses, conversation about people and places Marcus and I had never heard of. I smiled and nodded, contributed when directly asked questions, and watched Marcus do the same. He'd learned early how to navigate these spaces, how to be seen but not heard, how to take up as little space as possible. After dinner came the gift, exchange, and then the photo session. Victoria always documented everything. It was part of maintaining the family legacy, she said. Photo albums going back generations lined their library shelves, visual proof of the Worthington dynasty. All right, everyone, Let's get some pictures by the tree, Victoria announced, directing people like a general commanding troops. Richard's family here, Thomas's family there, and William and I in the center. I moved to stand with James, assuming we'd be included in the big family shot. But Victoria put her hand up like a traffic cop. Just the immediate family for this one, dear. I stepped back, stung but not surprised. Marcus stayed with me, which I appreciated, but James moved forward with his birth family. I told myself it was just one photo. They'd take others, but they didn't. Photo after photo, different combinations, different poses, but always the same exclusion. Marcus and I stood to the side like hired help, watching them document their family memories without us in them. That's when it happened. Victoria was setting up yet another shot, this time of the grandchildren. Sophia, Richard's kids, Thomas's daughter, but not Marcus. Marcus, honey, you can take a picture with your mom later, she said dismissively, not even looking at him. The room went completely silent. Even the kids knew this was wrong. James opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, Marcus stepped forward. Actually, I think there's something you all need to see first, Marcus said, his voice clear and steady in a way that reminded me exactly where he gets his strength. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. William, his grandfather, glanced over with mild interest. What's that, son? Marcus walked directly to William and handed him the paper. It's a copy of your father's will, the real one, the one you've been pretending doesn't exist. Time stopped. I mean, it literally felt like the universe paused to process what my 12-year-old son had just said. William's face drained of color as he unfolded the paper. Victoria stepped closer, trying to see what it was. Richard and Thomas moved in from both sides, suddenly very interested in documents they thought were buried decades ago. Where did you get this? William whispered, his composure cracking for the first time in all the years I'd known him. Marcus looked around the room with the kind of confidence I'd never seen from him before. I didn't get it anywhere. Dad gave it to me. He's been trying to tell you about it for years, but you never wanted to listen. All eyes turned to James, who had gone pale but stood straighter than I'd seen him stand in his father's house ever before. It's true, he said quietly. Grandfather left specific instructions about how he wanted the family trust distributed. Instructions that have been ignored for 30 years. The paper in William's hands seemed to be shaking slightly. Victoria snatched it from him, scanning the contents with growing alarm. The color in her cheeks was fading fast. This is impossible, she stammered. This document was never probated. It's not legally binding. Marcus, my beautiful, brilliant boy, smiled for the first time all evening. Actually, it is. Dad had it authenticated last year, and filed with the probate court last month. Turns out great-grandfather wasn't just wealthy, he was progressive. He left very specific instructions about inclusion, about making sure the EC family welcomed all members equally, especially those who brought new perspectives to the table. The room was so quiet you could hear the grandfather clock ticking from 3 rooms away. Everyone was staring at Marcus, then at James, then at the paper that was apparently rewriting their entire understanding of family hierarchy. Richard finally found his voice. What exactly does it say? James cleared his throat. It says that any family member who actively excludes or discriminates against other family members forfeits their rights to the trust. Grandfather apparently experienced enough prejudice in his early life to want to prevent it from happening in his bloodline. Marcus nodded, then looked directly at Victoria. It also says that when family members marry, their spouses and children automatically become full beneficiaries with equal standing, no exceptions, and he paused dramatically, like he'd been saving the best for last. It establishes an oversight committee to ensure these provisions are followed. Guess who's been secretly documenting every family gathering for the past 2 years? He pulled out his phone and showed them photo after photo. All the times Marcus and I had been excluded from pictures. All the times we'd been treated as less than. But also, photos of us participating, contributing, being part of the family when we were allowed to be. I learned about digital evidence in my debate class, Marcus continued, clearly enjoying himself now. Turns out, all those times you excluded us from photos? That's called discriminatory behavior. And according to great-grandfather's will, it could cost you everything. Victoria sat down heavily in the nearest chair. The woman who had spent 5 years making me feel unwelcome in her family was suddenly faced with the reality that her own great-grandfather-in-law had anticipated exactly her kind of behavior and taken steps to prevent it. William looked at James with something that might have been respect for the first time since I'd met him. "You've been planning this for how long?" "Not planning, exactly," James replied. "But great-grandfather left me that will when I was in medical school. He told me to use it if the family ever forgot what really mattered. I kept hoping it wouldn't be necessary." Thomas, ever the lawyer, was studying the document now. This is actually ironclad. Father, do you realize what this means?" What it meant was that the family fortune, the trust fund that had supported the Worthington lifestyle for generations, was suddenly contingent on them treating Marcus and me as full family members, not just tolerating us, but genuinely including us. The best part? Marcus had orchestrated all of this. My son, who had been quietly observing and documenting years of microaggressions, who had convinced his father it was time to take action, who had chosen the moment perfectly for maximum impact. "So," Marcus said, looking around the room with the composure of someone 3 times his age, "should we try those family photos again? I think great-grandfather would have wanted us all to be in them." Looking back now, I realized the signs of their prejudice were always there, but I was so desperate to belong that I convinced myself I was imagining things. When James and I first got engaged, Victoria insisted on hosting an engagement party at their country club, the Brookline Hills Club, where they'd been members for 4 generations. She made such a big deal about it, about welcoming me into the family, that I actually thought she meant it. I should have known better when she asked me 3 separate times if I had something appropriate to wear. When I showed up in an elegant navy dress that I'd saved 2 months to buy, she looked me up and down and said, "Oh, how lovely. I almost wore that exact same dress to the charity luncheon last month." The message was clear. You're wearing a dress I've already discarded. The entire evening was an education in subtle warfare. She introduced me to their friends as James's little nurse, with emphasis on the word little, as if my profession and my physical stature were somehow connected. When people asked about my background, she'd jump in before I could answer. "Elena's from such an interesting family, very authentic." The way she said authentic made it sound like a consolation prize. Marcus was 11 then, and he watched. It all with those sharp eyes of his. Afterward, in the car ride home, he asked, "Mom, why did everyone keep saying you were brave for coming tonight?" I'd brushed it off, told him people were just being polite, but he persisted. "Brave usually means you're doing something scary. Were you scared of them?" That question haunted me because the truth was, yes, I was scared of them. Not physically, but scared of their judgment, scared of not measuring up, scared that their rejection would somehow poison the beautiful thing James and I had built together. I was scared that Marcus would internalize their messages about where we belonged in their hierarchy. But Marcus wasn't afraid of them, and that should have been my first clue about what was coming years later at that Christmas dinner. As time went on, the exclusions became more systematic. Victoria would host ladies' lunches and forget to invite me. When they planned the annual family vacation to Martha's Vineyard, they booked a house that somehow had exactly enough bedrooms for everyone except Marcus and me. "Oh dear, I must have miscounted." "Well, there's a lovely bed and breakfast in town," Victoria said with that practiced look of innocent surprise. James always tried to fix things after the fact, offering to pay for our accommodations, insisting we join them anyway. But the damage was always done. The message was always the same. You're an afterthought, an inconvenience, a burden on our perfect family dynamic. The worst part wasn't even the big gestures of exclusion. It was the daily death by 1,000 cuts. Victoria would organize family group chats for holidays, and somehow Marcus and I would never get added until last minute, after all the planning was done. She'd send James articles about child development that somehow always emphasized the importance of stable, traditional family structures. She'd reminisce about James's childhood at family dinners, talking about before everything changed, in a way that made it clear that our arrival was the change she was referring to. Richard and Caroline were just as bad, but in different ways. They'd ask Marcus questions designed to highlight his differences. Did he speak Spanish at home? Did he celebrate ethnic holidays? Was he worried about college applications since he wasn't legacy? They thought they were being worldly and inclusive, but every question reminded him that he was seen as other. Thomas and Patricia were more subtle, but equally damaging. They'd make comments about blended families and the challenges of integration right in front of us, speaking about us like we were a sociological experiment rather than human beings trying to belong. But the children were often the most honest. Richard's son Blake, a year older than Marcus, once told him that his parents said Marcus was lucky to have a dad now, since his real dad didn't want him. Marcus came home from that family dinner, unusually quiet. Later that night, I found him in his room looking at a photo of James teaching him to throw a baseball. "Mom," he said without looking up, "why do they think Dad isn't my real dad? He's more real than the guy who left us." That's when I realized that Marcus wasn't just observing the family dynamics. He was systematically understanding them. He was learning how power worked in the Worthington family, how respect was earned and withheld, how belonging was granted or denied, and he was getting angry. The photo exclusion evolved gradually. At first, it was subtle, positioning me at the edge of group shots where I could be easily cropped out later. Victoria would direct photo sessions like a film director, moving people around, adjusting poses, always managing to place Marcus and me peripheral to the main family. "Let's get one of just the Worthington grandchildren," she'd say deliberately, excluding Marcus despite the fact that James had legally adopted him 2 years prior. Or, how about one with just the sons and their father? Conveniently forgetting that this meant excluding all the women and children who had married into or been born into the family. Marcus started taking his own photos with his tablet, documenting every family gathering from his perspective. He'd photobomb their formal shots, sneak candid pictures of everyone actually enjoying themselves, create his own version of family memories. I thought it was just a kid being a kid, but I was wrong. Marcus was building evidence. One particularly painful incident happened at Sophia's 10th birthday party. Victoria had hired a professional photographer to capture the family celebration. The photographer took hundreds of photos, Sophia with her presents, Sophia with her grandparents, Sophia with her cousins, various combinations of family members. Marcus was included in exactly 3 photos, and I was in none of them. When the photo album arrived a month later, it told a story of a family celebration where Marcus and I simply didn't exist. James was furious and confronted his mother, but she just said, "The photographer must have missed some shots. These things happen at large events." That night, Marcus showed me his tablet. He'd taken photos of the photographer's shot list, showing that Victoria had specifically requested family portraits excluding non-blood relatives. He'd documented the whole thing. "Mom," he said, showing me the evidence, "she's lying. She told the photographer not to include us. I heard her." I sat there looking at my 11-year-old son who had figured out what I'd been trying to deny. That this wasn't about oversight or tradition or awkwardness. This was deliberate, systematic exclusion designed to make us feel like we didn't belong. What should we do about it? I asked him, genuinely curious about his perspective. Nothing yet, he said, but there was something in his voice that suggested he was already planning something. But Dad needs to see this. He needs to stop making excuses for them. That conversation was a turning point. Marcus started approaching family gatherings with a different energy. He wasn't trying to fit in anymore. He was collecting data. He'd position himself where he could observe and record. He'd ask innocent questions that revealed telling answers. He was conducting an investigation. Meanwhile, I was struggling with my own role in this dynamic. James kept encouraging me to address things directly with his parents, to have honest conversations about inclusion and respect. But every time I tried, Victoria would deflect with comments about how sensitive I was, or how different generations express affection differently. The breaking point came when Marcus won his school's science fair with a project about social anthropology, specifically how families create and enforce hierarchies through seemingly innocent rituals like photo-taking and seating arrangements. He'd used our experiences with the Worthingtons as his case study, though he'd been careful not to name them directly. James was so proud he wanted to share Marcus's achievement at the next family dinner. But when Marcus explained his project, the table went dead silent. William asked if Marcus had permission to study their family like laboratory subjects. Victoria suggested that maybe Marcus should focus on more traditional science projects in the future. But Marcus wasn't backing down anymore. "It's not studying you like subjects," he said calmly. "It's documenting patterns of behavior, and the pattern here is pretty clear." That was when I realized my son wasn't just collecting evidence. He was preparing for war, and he was going to win it with intelligence, patience, and perfect timing. The months leading up to that fateful Christmas dinner were filled with subtle changes in our family dynamic. James started pushing back more against his parents' subtle slights. He'd pointedly include Marcus in conversations he was being excluded from. He'd redirect conversation when Victoria made innocent comments about real families or traditional values. But Marcus was working on something bigger. He'd been spending time with James after dinner, asking questions about family history, about great-grandfather Worthington, about how the family trust worked. James thought his son was just curious about his new family's legacy, but Marcus was doing research. He'd discovered that the original Worthington fortune came from James's great-grandfather, a man who'd emigrated from Ireland during the potato famine and built a shipping empire through hard work and vision. A man who'd experienced discrimination himself and had very specific ideas about how his family should treat those who came after him. Marcus had found inconsistencies in family stories, gaps in what William told them about their inheritance versus what public records showed, and Marcus, being a child of the digital age, knew how to research things that previous generations might have accepted on faith. One evening, about 3 months before Christmas, Marcus approached James with a direct question. "Dad, what happened to great-grandfather's real will?" James nearly choked on his coffee. "What do you mean, his real will?" "The one he wrote when you were in college. The one he left you. You still have it, don't you?" James stared at his son, my son, who had somehow figured out a family secret that had been buried for decades. "How do you know about that?" Marcus showed him a laptop filled with research, obituaries, probate records, family tree documents, financial filings. "I know because nothing else makes sense. Great-grandfather was worth way more when he died than what the family claims they inherited. And he was way too smart to leave that much money without conditions about how it should be used." That night, James told me everything. About the will his grandfather had left him with specific instructions. Don't use it unless the family forgets what really matters. About how his grandfather had experienced enough prejudice in his own life to want to prevent it in future generations. About how he'd been watching his family exclude Marcus and me for years, growing more and more convinced that it was time to take action. Marcus, meanwhile, had already formed his own plan. If they were going to exclude us from family photos, if they were going to treat us like outsiders at every gathering, if they were going to make us prove our worth over and over again, then he was going to give them a reality check they'd never forget. And he was going to do it with the nuclear option, their beloved family money. The weeks before Christmas, Marcus was different. Calmer, more confident, more purposeful. He helped me pick out gifts for everyone, but he also spent time wrapping something special for his grandfather. A manila envelope he sealed himself and marked with, "For William, from great-grandfather." When I asked him what it was, he just smiled and said, "Something that's going to change everything, Mom. Great-grandfather made sure of that." I should have known then that my son had orchestrated something that would shift the entire balance of power in our family. But I was still thinking like someone who'd been taught to be grateful for scraps, someone who'd been conditioned to accept less than she deserved. Marcus wasn't thinking like that at all. Marcus was thinking like someone who knew exactly what he was worth, what his mother was worth, and what his family deserved, and he was willing to fight for it in the most devastating way possible, with their own family history as his weapon. That Christmas Eve, as we got ready for dinner at the Worthington estate, Marcus put on his best suit and checked his jacket. Pocket one more time. "You ready for this, Mom?" "Ready for what, baby?" He smiled, and for the first time in years, it was the smile of someone who held all the cards. Ready to finally be seen. I had no idea what he meant then. But 12 hours later, I'd understand exactly what my son had been planning, and I'd be prouder of him than I'd ever been of anything in my entire life. The moment Marcus handed that document to William, I watched 30 years of carefully constructed family mythology crumble in real time. William's hands were actually trembling as he held the will, his eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. Victoria had snatched it from him and was reading over his shoulder, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that looked dangerously close to panic. "This can't be legal," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. Harold's will was settled decades ago. The trust was established according to his wishes. Marcus, my brilliant son, stood there with the confidence of someone who'd done his homework. Actually, Grandmother Victoria, that trust was established according to what Grandpa William told everyone were great-grandfather's wishes. But this, he pointed to the document now passing between family members like a hot potato. This is what great-grandfather actually wrote, with witnesses and notarization.
And very specific instructions about what would happen if his real wishes were ignored. Thomas, the family lawyer, was studying the document with the intensity of someone whose entire world was shifting. "Father," he said slowly, "did you know about this provision?" The provision Marcus was referring to was beautifully, devastatingly clear. Harold Worthington II had left his entire fortune, not just a portion but everything, in a trust that was contingent on the family treating all members with equal dignity and respect. He'd specifically anticipated that future generations might develop the kind of prejudices he'd fought against his entire life, and he'd built in consequences that would make their heads spin. William finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "James, where did you get this?" "Grandfather gave it to me when I graduated medical school," James replied, standing straighter than I'd seen him stand in years. "He told me it was insurance against the family becoming exactly what they'd become tonight." But Marcus wasn't done. Oh no, my son had more cards to play. He pulled out his tablet and started swiping through photos. "I've been documenting every family gathering for the past 3 years, he announced to the room. Every time Mom and I were excluded from photos, every time we were seated at the kids' table despite being adults, every time someone made a comment about real family or traditional values, or how lucky I was to finally have a father figure." He turned the tablet around, showing a slideshow he'd prepared. Photo after photo of family gatherings where Marcus and I were visibly separated from the core family. Screenshots of group chat messages where plans were made without including us. Videos he'd secretly recorded of conversations where we were discussed like unwelcome house guests rather than family members. According to great-grandfather's will, Marcus continued, his voice crystal clear in the stunned silence, discriminatory behavior toward family members, especially those who've joined the family through marriage or adoption, triggers a complete review of trust distributions, and persistent patterns of exclusion, which I have documented extensively, can result in complete forfeiture of trust benefits. Caroline gasped audibly. Forfeiture? What do you mean, forfeiture? Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd been underestimated for far too long. I mean that great-grandfather established an oversight committee, independent trustees who review family behavior annually to ensure compliance with his values. And guess what? Dad submitted my documentation to them last month. The room exploded into chaos. Everyone started talking at once, demands for explanations, accusations flying, panic about their financial futures. But through it all, William just sat there staring at Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time. Finally, William held up his hand for silence. When the room quieted, he looked directly at Marcus. You're 12 years old. 13. Next month, Marcus corrected. And age doesn't make truth less true, Grandpa William. The way Marcus said Grandpa William, not dismissively, not angrily, but with genuine familial affection mixed with disappointment, seemed to hit the old man harder than any accusation could have. Son, William said, and for the first time, he was talking to Marcus like an equal. Tell me what you want. Marcus looked around the room, making eye contact with each family member before answering. I want my mum to be in every family photo she wants to be in. I want her introduced as Elena Worthington, not as James's wife or the nurse. I want to be called your grandson, not Elena's boy or James's stepson. I want us invited to family events from the beginning, not added as afterthoughts. I want respect. He paused, then added something that made my heart soar. And I want you to love us the way great-grandfather intended. Because according to his will, he already considered us full family members the moment Dad married Mom and adopted me. You're the ones who've been pretending otherwise. Victoria, who had been silent through this entire exchange, finally spoke up. This is blackmail. Marcus turned to her with that same calm confidence. No, Grandmother Victoria, this is accountability. Great-grandfather set up this system because he knew that wealth could make people forget their values. He gave the family a choice, treat everyone with dignity, or lose the privilege of carrying his legacy. Richard, ever the businessman, was already doing calculations in his head. What's the timeline on this review? James stepped forward, his arm around my shoulders. The Oversight Committee meets quarterly. They've already reviewed Marcus's documentation and conducted interviews with several family members. Their next meeting is in 2 weeks. Interviews? Caroline squeaked. With whom? The staff members who've worked for the family for years, Marcus replied matter-of-factly. Turns out, people notice when family members are treated differently. Several of them approached Dad after last year's Christmas party to ask why Mum and I weren't in any of the photos that got displayed in the main hallway. I realized then that Marcus hadn't just been documenting our exclusion. He'd been building a comprehensive case. He'd gathered testimony from housekeepers, caterers, even the photographer Victoria had hired for various events. He'd created an irrefutable record of systematic discrimination that even the most expensive lawyers couldn't argue away. Thomas, still studying the will, looked up with something approaching admiration. This is actually brilliant. Grandfather Harold was a strategic genius. He didn't just leave money, he left a system to ensure his values would be upheld. "Yeah," Marcus said simply. "He was pretty cool. I wish I could have met him." That comment seemed to pierce through William's shock. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and I saw something shift in his expression. "He would have liked you, son. You're a lot like him, actually." "I know," Marcus replied without arrogance. "I've read everything about him I could find. His letters to investors talking about giving everyone a fair chance. His speeches about how America was built by people willing to work hard regardless of where they came from. His donations to organizations fighting discrimination. He wouldn't have tolerated the way you've treated my family." The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the stunned silence of people trying to process shocking news. This was the contemplative silence of people being forced to confront their own behavior and finding it lacking. Patricia, who had barely spoken all evening, finally, and broke that silence. "Elena, I owe you an apology." I looked at her in surprise. Patricia had always been politely distant, but never openly hostile. "We all do," she continued, looking around the room. "I've been watching this family treat you like an outsider for years, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But tolerance of discrimination is participation in discrimination." That's when something beautiful happened. Sophia, Thomas, and Patricia's daughter walked over to Marcus. "I'm sorry too," she said quietly. "I knew what they were doing wasn't fair, but I didn't know how to fix it." Marcus hugged his cousin, and that's what she was, his cousin, regardless of how. The adults had tried to categorize their relationship. "It's not your job to fix adults being stupid, Sophia, but thanks." Even in this moment of family reckoning, Marcus was being gracious, wise beyond his years, teaching all of us how to handle conflict with dignity. William stood up slowly, his joints creaking with age and perhaps the weight of realization. He walked over to where Marcus and I were standing, James's protective arm still around my shoulders. "Elena," he said, and his voice was different now. Softer, more human. "I've been a foolish old man. I let prejudice and tradition blind me to what was right in front of me." He turned to Marcus. "And you, son, you're more of a Worthington than any of us deserve. You stood up for what's right. You honored your great-grandfather's memory, and you did it all with more dignity than we've shown you." Marcus looked up at him with those wise eyes. "I just want us to be a real family, Grandpa, not because of money or wills or rules, but because we choose to love each other." That's when Victoria finally cracked. The woman who had spent years perfecting the art of exclusion broke down completely. "Oh God," she sobbed, "what have I done? What have we all done?" She ran to me, and for the first time since I'd known her, her tears were genuine. "Elena, can you ever forgive me? I've been so wrong, so cruel, so stupid." I looked at this woman who had made my life miserable for 5 years, who had tried to make me feel small and unwelcome in her family, and I felt something I didn't expect: pity. Because I realized that her prejudice had cost her the chance to know Marcus and me all these years. She'd missed out on loving us because she was too busy judging us. "Victoria," I said gently, "forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing to build a better future." Marcus nodded sagely. "Besides," he added with a hint of his old mischievous smile, "great-grandfather's will says the family has to undergo sensitivity training and community service if they want to keep the trust. So we're all going to have plenty of opportunities to practice treating each other better." That got a surprised laugh from several family members. Leave it to Marcus to drop the other shoe with humor. "Wait," Richard said. "What kind of community service?" Marcus's grin widened.
Mom and I get to choose. We're thinking something involving working with immigrant families or single parents. You know, give you all some perspective on how the other half lives. The beauty of that moment was watching a family that had been built on exclusion and judgment, start to crumble those walls in real time. It wasn't going to be instant or easy. Decades of ingrained behavior don't change overnight. But something fundamental had shifted. William walked to the mantelpiece where Victoria's carefully curated family photos stood in their silver frames. One by one, he turned them face down. "We'll be redoing all of these," he announced. "Real family photos this time, with everyone who belongs in them." He turned back to Marcus with something approaching grandfather's pride. "I think your great-grandfather would be very proud of what you've accomplished tonight, son. You've reminded us what family really means." Marcus walked over and took William's hand. "Can we start over, Grandpa? All of us?" William knelt down, bringing himself to Marcus's eye level. "I'd like that very much, grandson. Very much indeed." That's when I finally let myself cry, not from humiliation or frustration or anger, but from relief and joy and hope. Watching my son teach an entire family about dignity, respect, and what it truly means to belong. That was a moment I'll treasure forever. The rest of the evening transformed completely. Instead of the stiff, formal family gathering we'd endured for years, it became an actual celebration. People relaxed, conversations became genuine, and Marcus, my beautiful, brilliant son, was finally seen as the remarkable young man he'd always been. When it came time for photos, everyone insisted Marcus and I be front and center, not as afterthoughts or obligations, but as the catalyst for positive change in a family that had lost its way. The most powerful moment came when Victoria asked Marcus to pose for a special photo with her, just the two of them. "I want to remember this moment," she said, "when my grandson taught me how to be worthy of the Worthington name." As we drove home that night, Marcus was quiet in the back seat. Finally, he spoke up. "Mom, do you think they really mean it? About changing?" I thought about it carefully. "I think they're going to try, baby. And sometimes trying is enough. To start real change." James reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of both of you. But Marcus, what you did tonight, that wasn't just about getting us included in photos. You gave this family a chance to redeem itself." Marcus nodded, thoughtfully. Great-grandfather was smart. He knew that sometimes people need consequences to remember what's important, but he also gave them a way to do better. That night, I realized that my son hadn't just won a battle against discrimination. He'd won the war for our rightful place. In this family with intelligence, courage, and compassion, he'd turned exclusion into inclusion, prejudice into understanding, and a divided family into something that could genuinely be whole. Most importantly, he'd done it all while teaching everyone, including me, that you don't have to accept less than you deserve just because accepting more feels scary. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and demand the respect that should have been yours all along. And sometimes, the smallest voice in the room carries the most truth. The weeks following that Christmas dinner were unlike anything I could have imagined. The Worthington family didn't just apologize and move on. They completely restructured how they operated as a family. William, true to his word, had all the family portraits professionally redone, and this time, Marcus and I weren't just included, we were central to the compositions. But more than that, he commissioned a new family portrait that would hang in the main foyer, with Marcus and me prominently featured. Victoria threw herself into what she called her redemption project, with the same intensity she'd once used to exclude us. She started by personally calling every photographer, caterer, and event planner they'd ever used to inform them that Elena and Marcus Worthington were to be treated with the same priority as any blood relative. She even tracked down photos from past events where we'd been cropped out and had them professionally restored with us back in them. But the real transformation came through the community service requirement that Marcus had so cleverly built into great-grandfather Harold's will. The Oversight Committee had indeed mandated 200 hours of community service for each family member over the age of 18, working specifically with organizations that supported immigrants, single parents, and blended families. I'll never forget. The first day Victoria showed up at Casa Esperanza, the immigrant services center where we'd been assigned to volunteer. She arrived in designer clothes and pearls, looking like she was attending a charity gala rather than sorting donated clothes and teaching English to recent arrivals. But something beautiful happened over those first few hours. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother from Guatemala who'd arrived with her 3 children just months before, was struggling to fill out school enrollment forms. Victoria, despite her initial awkwardness, sat with Maria for 2 hours, patiently helping her navigate the bureaucracy. When Maria's youngest daughter started crying from hunger, Victoria drove to the grocery store and returned with diapers, formula, and enough groceries. For a week. That evening, Victoria called me in tears. "Elena, I've been such a fool. I've spent my whole life judging people without ever understanding what they've been through. Maria is raising 3 children alone in a foreign country, working 2 jobs, going to school at night, and she does it all with more grace than I've shown in 60 years of privilege." The community service became the catalyst for the family's real transformation. Richard discovered he had a talent for financial literacy education and started teaching budgeting classes to single parents. Thomas used his legal skills to help families navigate immigration paperwork pro bono. Caroline organized a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. Each family member found their own way to give back, and in doing so, they began to understand the strength it takes to build a life from nothing. But perhaps the most profound change was in how they treated Marcus and me within the family structure. What started as compliance with a legal document evolved into genuine recognition of our value. Marcus wasn't just included in family activities. His insights and perspectives were actively sought out. When the family was planning their annual charity gala, it was Marcus who suggested they focus on supporting educational opportunities for children in mixed-status families, and his ideas formed the foundation of the entire event. The sensitivity, training that was also mandated by the will, took the form of monthly family meetings, facilitated by Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, a family therapist who specialized in blended families and cultural integration. These sessions were initially uncomfortable, filled with awkward acknowledgments of past behavior and tentative attempts at understanding. But gradually, they became opportunities for real dialogue about privilege, inclusion, and what it means to be a modern family. During one particularly powerful session, William shared stories about his father Harold that he'd never told before. How Harold had been denied jobs early in his career because of anti-Irish sentiment. How he'd faced discrimination at country clubs and business associations until his success became impossible to ignore. How he'd sworn that if he ever had the power to prevent others from experiencing such exclusion, he would use it. "I forgot those lessons," William admitted, looking directly at Marcus and me. "I became the very thing my father fought against. I'm grateful you reminded me who we're supposed to be." The family dynamics shifted in ways both profound and subtle. Group chats now began with making sure everyone was included. Family events were planned with consideration for everyone's schedules and preferences. Most importantly, the language changed. Marcus wasn't Elena's son anymore. He was simply my grandson or our son. I wasn't James's wife. I was Elena, a full member of the family with my own identity and value. But the most meaningful changes happened in the quiet moments. Victoria started calling me just to chat. Not about family obligations, but about books we'd both read or movies we'd enjoyed. She began asking for my opinion on family matters, not as a formality, but because she genuinely valued my perspective. William would seek out Marcus for chess games and conversations about everything from school to philosophy to his dreams for the future. The wealth disparity that had once been a source of tension became an opportunity for mentorship and growth. James and I decided to use our newfound access to family resources not for personal luxury, but to establish a foundation focused on educational opportunities for children from single-parent households. Marcus was deeply involved in the planning, and at 13, he became the youngest board member in the foundation's history. One day, about 6 months after that transformative Christmas dinner, Marcus came home from a family gathering with an interesting observation. "Mom, do you realize we don't even think about being included anymore? We just belong." He was right. The hyper-awareness of our place in the family had dissolved into natural belonging. We weren't the add-ons anymore. We were integral, parts of a family that had learned to value diversity of experience and perspective as strength rather than inconvenience. The annual Martha's Vineyard vacation that year was completely different. Instead of being afterthoughts squeezed into a bed and breakfast, Marcus and I had our own suite in the main house. But more than the physical inclusion, we were part of every decision, every tradition, every moment that mattered. When they recreated the family photo they took every year on the beach, Marcus and I weren't positioned at the edges. We were right in the center, surrounded by family who genuinely wanted us there. Perhaps the most powerful moment came during Thanksgiving that year. Victoria asked Marcus to give the blessing before dinner, and his words captured the transformation perfectly. "I'm grateful for a family that learned that love isn't about where you come from, but about choosing to grow together. I'm grateful for great-grandfather Harold, who was wise enough to know that families need accountability to stay true to their values. And I'm grateful for second chances, because they gave us all the opportunity to become the family we were meant to be." The legal aspect of great-grandfather's will continued to play a role, but it transformed from a threat to a framework for positive action. The Oversight Committee's quarterly reviews became celebrations of the family's growth rather than assessments of compliance. The trust fund, rather than being a source of anxiety, became a tool for positive impact in the community. Marcus's documentation project evolved too. What had started as evidence of discrimination became a record of transformation. He created a presentation for the Family Foundation showing how they'd changed, how they'd grown, and how they were now modeling inclusive family values for others struggling with similar challenges. The ripple effects of that Christmas revelation extended far beyond our immediate family. Other wealthy families reached out, wanting to understand how the Worthingtons had managed such a dramatic transformation. Marcus, with his natural confidence, an articulate way of explaining complex social dynamics, became an unexpected spokesperson for the power of youth voices in family change. He started speaking at schools and community centers about standing up for what's right, about the importance of documentation and evidence, and about how sometimes the smallest person in the room can create the biggest change. His message was always the same. Respect isn't about age or status or bloodline. It's about recognizing the fundamental human dignity in everyone. One of my proudest moments came when Marcus was invited to speak at his school's Diversity and Inclusion Assembly. He talked about what he'd learned from the experience. Change doesn't happen because people are forced to change. Real change happens when people understand why change is necessary and what they gain by embracing it. My family didn't just learn to include my mom and me. They learned that their lives were richer, more interesting, and more meaningful when they stopped judging people and started appreciating them. The audience gave him a standing ovation. But what moved me most was seeing Victoria and William in the front row, tears streaming down their faces, clapping harder than anyone else for the grandson who had saved their family from itself. As I write this, 2 years have passed since that Christmas dinner. Marcus is 15 now, confident and wise beyond his years, planning for college and already talking about how he wants to use his education to help other families navigate complex dynamics around inclusion and belonging. The Worthingtons aren't perfect. No family is, but they're committed to growth, to learning, to being better. James and I renewed our wedding vows last year, and this time the entire family participated in the ceremony. Victoria and Patricia planned the reception, William walked me down the aisle alongside my father, and Marcus served as James's best man. The photos from that day tell a story of a family that chose love over prejudice, inclusion over exclusion, growth over stagnation. The most important lesson from our journey isn't about wills or money or legal consequences. It's about the power of speaking truth with courage and love. Marcus could have responded to years of exclusion with bitterness or retreat. Instead, he chose to fight for our family's potential with intelligence, documentation, and an unshakable belief that people can change when they're given both the motivation and the framework to do so. To anyone reading this who feels excluded, overlooked, or undervalued in their own family or community, Marcus's story offers hope and strategy. Document the patterns you observe. Build your case with facts, not just emotions. Find allies who share your values. And remember that change often comes not from explosive confrontations, but from patient, strategic actions that make the consequences of continued bad behavior impossible to ignore. But perhaps, most importantly, remember that you don't have to accept being treated as less than you are. Family isn't just about blood or money or tradition. Family is about choice. The choice to see each other's value, to include rather than exclude, to grow rather than remain stuck in harmful patterns. Marcus taught all of us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept unacceptable treatment. He showed us that age doesn't determine wisdom, that courage can come in small packages, and that the truth, when presented at the right moment with the right evidence, has the power to transform even the most entrenched patterns of prejudice. The Worthington family today is stronger, happier, and more connected than it ever was when it operated on exclusion and judgment. We learned that diversity of experience and perspective isn't something to be tolerated. It's something to be celebrated, because it makes every family story richer, every family bond stronger, and every family gathering more meaningful. Marcus keeps great-grandfather Harold's will framed in his room now, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. A reminder that families are built not just on love, but on the commitment to keep choosing love even when it's difficult, even when it requires change, even when it means admitting you were wrong. And every Christmas, when we gather for our now treasured family dinner, we take a moment to acknowledge not just how far we've come, but how grateful we are for a 13-year-old boy who refused to accept that his family wasn't worthy of the respect and inclusion they deserved. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most truth. Sometimes the youngest person in the room has the most wisdom. And sometimes, fighting for your family means fighting against the very people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. But when that fight is won with love, intelligence, and unwavering principle, the victory isn't just yours. It's a victory for everyone who benefits from the stronger, more inclusive family that emerges from the struggle. That's the real legacy of that Christmas dinner. Not the shock or the drama or the revelation of hidden documents, but the transformative power of a child who believed his family could be better and refused to accept anything less than their highest potential. Marcus showed us all that the courage to demand respect, the wisdom to document truth, and the strategic thinking to create change can overcome generations of exclusion and prejudice. He proved that families, like people, can evolve, grow, and become something beautiful when someone is brave enough to hold them accountable to their best selves. And in the end, that's what family should be. Not a group of people bound by obligation or tradition, but a chosen community committed to seeing the best in each other, including everyone who belongs, and building something together that's stronger than any of its individual parts. The photos on the Worthington mantle now tell that story. A story of transformation, inclusion, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and son who refused to be invisible, and a family that learned the true meaning of belonging. 3 years have passed since that transformative Christmas dinner, and the ripple effects continue to spread in ways none of us could have anticipated. Marcus is now 16, a young man whose confidence and wisdom attract attention wherever he goes. But more than his personal growth, what amazes me is how he's channeled his experience into a movement that's changing how families across the country think about inclusion and belonging. The Worthington Family Foundation, which started as a way to fulfill the community service requirements of great-grandfather Harold's will, has become one of the most innovative organizations addressing family dynamics and social inclusion in New England. Marcus serves not just as the youngest board member, but as the driving force behind their most successful programs. His Invisible Children initiative identifies kids in blended families who face exclusion similar to what he experienced. Through mentorship programs, family counseling resources, and legal advocacy, they've helped over 300 families navigate complex dynamics around acceptance and belonging. What makes the program unique is that it's led by young people who've lived these experiences themselves. Marcus often tells the children he mentors, "Your voice matters not despite your age, but because of your perspective. Adults get stuck in patterns they don't even see anymore. You see them clearly because you're living with the consequences." One particularly powerful case involved the Chen family, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen who'd helped our family. David Chen, a Chinese-American businessman, had married Sarah, a white single mother of two, but his traditional parents refused to acknowledge her children as their grandchildren. The kids were excluded from family photos, ignored during visits, and made to feel invisible in their own stepfather's family. Marcus spent months working with the Chen children, teaching them how to document patterns of exclusion, how to build alliances within the family, and most importantly, how to advocate for themselves with dignity and strength. The breakthrough came when 8-year-old Emma Chen presented her grandparents with a photo album she'd created, showing all the moments they'd missed by choosing not to see her and her brother as family. "Grandma," little Emma had said, showing them pictures of her participating in school plays, winning science fairs, learning Chinese on her own time. "I made this album of our invisible family. We're here whether you see us or not. But don't you want to be part of our story instead of just watching from the outside?" David Chen called Marcus afterward, crying with gratitude. "Your mentorship gave my daughter the courage to speak truth, to power. But more than that, you taught her to do it with love instead of anger." My parents couldn't ignore her message because it came from such a pure place. The success stories keep mounting, but Marcus remains grounded in the reality that change is hard work that requires consistent effort. He's developed what he calls the documentation protocol, a systematic approach to identifying, recording, and addressing discriminatory patterns in family systems. This protocol has been adopted by family therapists, social workers, and even family courts dealing with custody and adoption cases. Victoria has become Marcus's most unlikely partner in this work. The woman who once excluded us from family photos now travels with Marcus to conferences about inclusive family practices. She's written a book called The Cost of Exclusion: A Grandmother's Journey from Prejudice to Purpose, which has become required reading in sociology programs at 3 major universities. During one speaking engagement I attended, Victoria shared her transformation with remarkable honesty. "I spent 5 years missing out on loving my grandson because I was too busy judging his mother. I taught my own children that worth was measured by bloodline rather than character. When Marcus held that will up that Christmas night, he wasn't just saving our family money, he was saving our souls." The legal framework that Marcus revealed has inspired similar provisions in other family trusts. Estate planning attorneys now regularly recommend values clauses that tie inheritance to demonstrated commitment to family inclusion and social responsibility. Marcus has been consulted on dozens of these cases, helping families craft documents that encourage generational values alignment rather than just wealth transfer. But perhaps the most profound impact has been on how institutions approach family inclusion. Schools now have found family programs that recognize and support non-traditional family structures. Churches are re-examining their definitions of family units. Even corporations are updating their family leave policies to be more inclusive. of blended and chosen families. Marcus's influence extends beyond family dynamics. He's been invited to speak at the United Nations Youth Assembly about systemic discrimination and the power of youth advocacy. His presentation, "When the Youngest Voice Carries the Most Truth," has been translated into 12 languages and viewed over 2 million times online. In his UN speech, Marcus shared a truth that resonates across cultures. Discrimination isn't just about refusing to include someone, it's about refusing to see their full humanity. When families, communities, or nations exclude people based on artificial categories, they don't just harm those individuals. They rob themselves of the richness that diversity brings to any human system. The most touching aspect of Marcus's work is how he's created space for other invisible children to find their voices. The Foundation's annual Speaking Truth to Power conference brings together young people from around the world who've used documentation, strategy, and courage to create change in their families and communities. Last year's keynote speaker was Amara Okafor, a 17-year-old from Nigeria whose stepmother had banned her from family celebrations after her father remarried. Using techniques she'd learned from Marcus's online workshops, Amara documented the discrimination and presented her evidence to her extended family's council of elders. The intervention not only restored her place in the family, but led to new traditions that honored children from previous marriages. "Marcus taught me that seeking justice isn't about revenge," Amara explained to the audience. "It's about creating space for love to flourish where exclusion once lived. My stepmother and I aren't just family now, we're friends. But that could only happen after she recognized the harm her behavior was causing." The Foundation has also pioneered research into the psychological impact of family exclusion on children. Dr. Maria Santos, a child psychologist working with the Foundation, published a groundbreaking study showing that children who experience systematic family exclusion develop coping mechanisms that often include hypervigilance, self-advocacy skills, and remarkable emotional intelligence. Marcus exemplifies what we've found in our research, Dr. Santos explained during a recent conference. Children who are forced to navigate family discrimination often develop extraordinary capabilities in reading social dynamics, building coalitions, and creating systemic change. They become what we call justice translators, able to see unfair patterns that adults have normalized and articulate them in ways that create understanding rather than defensiveness. This research has led to the development of new therapeutic approaches for blended families, school curricula focused on family diversity, and corporate training programs about inclusive workplace family cultures. Marcus's high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, often marvels at his impact. "I've been working with teenagers for 20 years, and I've never seen one handle complex social dynamics with such maturity and strategic thinking. But what impresses me most is that he's never lost his compassion, even for people who hurt him. He genuinely believes in people's capacity to change, and somehow that belief becomes self-fulfilling." The Worthington family gatherings now serve as informal case studies for healthy family dynamics. James and I often host other blended families at our regular Sunday dinners, creating a supportive community where children can see that their experiences aren't unique and that positive change is possible. During one such dinner, a 10-year-old, named Carlos, whose step-grandparents had been excluding him from family events, asked Marcus directly, "How did you know what to do? How did you know it would work?" Marcus thought carefully before answering, "I didn't know it would work, but I knew that doing nothing definitely wouldn't work. Sometimes you have to risk everything to save what you love. And family is worth fighting for, even when the fight is against family." These conversations have led to the creation of peer support groups for children in similar situations. The Young Advocates Network now has chapters in 43 states, providing resources, mentorship, and community for kids navigating family discrimination. The academic world has taken notice of Marcus's work as well. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government has offered him early admission based on his demonstrated leadership in social justice advocacy. Yale's School of Social Work wants him for their joint JD-MSW program, but Marcus is considering a different path entirely. I've learned that real change happens in communities, not just institutions, he explained during a recent family dinner. I want to spend a gap year expanding the Foundation's international work, then study engineering and social entrepreneurship. I want to build systems that make it easier for excluded people to advocate for themselves. Victoria immediately volunteered to help fund this gap year program, but Marcus politely declined. I appreciate the offer, Grandma, but I've learned that working for change feels different when you're not dependent on the people you're trying to change. I'll fund it through speaking fees and book royalties. Yes, Marcus has written a book. At 16, he's published The Invisible Children Manifesto: How Young People Can Document Discrimination and Create Family Change. It's become a bestseller in the parenting and social justice categories, with all proceeds going to the foundation. The book opens with a dedication that still brings tears to my eyes. To my mother, who taught me that dignity isn't negotiable, and to my family, who learned that love requires more than biology. It requires choice, effort, and the courage to grow. Recently, Marcus has been working on a documentary about family exclusion and transformation. He's interviewed dozens of families who've navigated similar challenges, creating a visual archive of how documentation, strategy, and persistence can overcome even deeply entrenched discrimination. One of the most powerful interviews is with William, who reflects on his transformation. When I was young, my father told me about facing discrimination as an Irish immigrant. I thought I understood prejudice because I'd heard those stories, but I didn't understand that I could be the one perpetuating it until my grandson held up a mirror and showed me what I'd become. The shame of that realization was overwhelming, but the opportunity for redemption that followed was the greatest gift of my life. The documentary, titled Found Family: The Power of Chosen Love, premieres next month at the Sundance Film Festival. Regardless of its reception, it represents the culmination of Marcus's journey from excluded child to advocate for family justice. But perhaps the most meaningful development has been watching Marcus's younger cousins grow up in an environment where inclusion is the norm, rather than the exception. Sophia, now 15, leads her school's Diversity and Inclusion Club. Richard's children volunteer regularly at immigrant services centers. These kids are growing up with a fundamental understanding that family means choosing to see and value everyone, regardless of their background or origin story. The language in our family has evolved completely. When William introduces us now, he says, "This is my family, all of them, each precious in their own way." When Victoria posts family photos on social media, she writes captions about the strength that comes from embracing diverse backgrounds and experiences. When Thomas and Patricia's daughter brings friends home, she explains without shame or explanation, "These are my aunt and cousin, Elena and Marcus. They're the ones who taught our family how to really love each other." Marcus often reminds people that the work isn't finished just because one family changed. Transformation isn't a destination, he says. It's a practice. Every day, every interaction, every family gathering is an opportunity to choose inclusion over exclusion, love over judgment, growth over stagnation. The oversight committee that once threatened the family's inheritance now serves as an advisory board for the foundation's grant-making processes. They've distributed over $5 million to organizations working on family inclusion, youth advocacy, and documentation of social discrimination. As I watch Marcus speaking to another group of young advocates, I'm reminded of something he said recently. Change doesn't happen because people are forced to change. Real change happens when people understand what they gain by changing, and when they have support systems that help them through the process. The shy little boy who once stood up in a church and demanded justice for his mother has grown into a young man who creates spaces for other children to find their voices. But more than that, he's proven that age doesn't determine impact. that truth spoken with courage can transform even the most resistant hearts, and that families, like societies, become stronger when they stop defining themselves by who they exclude and start celebrating who they include. The Christmas dinner that changed everything was just the beginning. What followed has been a masterclass in how sustained effort, strategic thinking, and unwavering belief in human potential can create ripple effects that extend far beyond any one family's transformation. Marcus is now planning a global initiative called the Found Family Project, which will create documentation and advocacy resources for excluded children in 50 countries. He's been in talks with UNICEF about adapting his protocols for refugee families and internationally adopted children who face discrimination in their new communities. But despite all this recognition and impact, Marcus remains grounded in the simple truth that started it all. Every child deserves to be seen, valued, and included in their family story. He's just made it his life's work to ensure that more children can claim that birthright, regardless of where they come from or how they joined their families. The boy who once documented his own exclusion now teaches others how to document their inclusion in families and communities that choose love over fear, growth over tradition, and connection over division. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful legacy of all, turning personal pain into collective healing, transforming individual struggle into universal hope. As Marcus likes to say at the end of his speeches, your voice matters, your truth matters, your family story matters. Don't wait for permission to claim your place in it. 5 years have now passed since that pivotal Christmas dinner, and Marcus has just graduated as valedictorian from Phillips Academy, Andover. At 21, he's deferred his acceptance to Harvard's joint program in public policy and social innovation to launch something unprecedented, the Global Found Family Institute, a research and advocacy center that's already being hailed as revolutionary by social scientists worldwide. Standing at his graduation podium, Marcus addressed an audience that included not just proud family members, but representatives from the United Nations, several heads of state, and families from around the world whose lives have been transformed by his work. His valedictorian speech, titled "The Compound Interest of Inclusion," has already been viewed over 10 million times online. When I was 12, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowded auditorium, I learned that exclusion isn't just about being left out of photos. It's about being erased from a narrative that should include you. But what I've learned since then is that inclusion creates compound interest. Each act of recognition and acceptance generates exponential returns for families, communities, and societies. The Global Found Family Institute, housed in a beautiful, restored mansion that was once a segregated country club, operates on principles that Marcus has refined over nearly a decade of advocacy work. The centerpiece is the Living Archive Project, which has documented over 5,000 family transformation stories from every continent except Antarctica. Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a family systems researcher from Tokyo who relocated to work with Marcus, explains the archive's significance. We're not just collecting stories of discrimination and transformation. We're identifying patterns, creating predictive models, and developing intervention strategies that can be adapted across cultures. Marcus has essentially created the first comprehensive database of how families change when confronted with their own exclusionary practices. One of the most powerful recent additions to the archive is the story of the Johannesburg-based Patel family. Sharma Patel, a successful businessman, had disowned his daughter Priya when she married Taiwo, a Nigerian man. Their mixed-race children were treated as strangers by the Patel side of the family for 8 years. Using materials from Marcus's institute, Priya's eldest daughter, only 14, created a presentation showing her grandfather how his exclusion was robbing him of relationships with 4 brilliant grandchildren who could have brought joy and pride to his life. The turning point came when the girl, Arya, presented her grandfather with 2 photo albums. One showed his life for the past 8 years, formal family gatherings with artificial smiles and increasing isolation. The other showed what he'd missed. His excluded grandchildren excelling in school, winning awards, learning Hindi and Gujarati on their own time to stay connected to their heritage, creating art that blended their multiple cultural influences. "Grandfather," Arya had said, "you've been protecting a version of our family that was smaller and sadder than what we could actually be. We don't want to take anything away from who we are. We want to add to it." Sharma Patel broke down completely. Within 6 months, he had not only reconciled with his daughter's family, but had established the Patel Okafor Foundation for Cross-Cultural Understanding in Johannesburg. The ripple effects spread through their community, challenging other traditional families to examine their own exclusionary practices. Marcus often shares this story because it demonstrates one of his key theories. Exclusion isn't just harmful to those who are excluded. It impoverishes the excluders by limiting their access to love, wisdom, and joy. When you shut people out, he explains in his TED Talk that's been viewed 50 million times, you don't just hurt them, you starve yourself of the relationships that could have made your life richer. The Institute's research has led to groundbreaking discoveries about the neuroscience of family bonding. Working with Harvard Medical School, they've identified specific brain chemistry changes that occur when previously excluded family members are fully integrated into family systems. The research shows measurable improvements in emotional regulation, stress management, and cognitive development in children who transition from exclusion to full inclusion. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, lead researcher on the Neuroscience Project, shares their findings with obvious excitement. We're seeing that family inclusion literally rewires the brain for better empathy, resilience, and social intelligence. Children who experience transformation from exclusion to acceptance show enhanced activity in brain regions associated with trust, emotional processing, and creative problem-solving. These findings have revolutionary implications for adoption, services, foster care systems, and blended family counseling. Several countries have already updated their family integration protocols based on the Institute's research. But Marcus hasn't forgotten the local impact of global work. Every summer, the Institute hosts the Invisible Children Symposium at the Worthington Estate. Young advocates from around the world gather to share strategies, learn new techniques, and support each other in their ongoing work for family justice. This year's symposium included Fatima al-Rashid from Qatar, who documented her stepmother's attempts to erase her from family records and used the evidence to secure legal recognition of her inheritance rights. There was Chen Wei from Beijing, who created a viral social media campaign after her father's new wife tried to ban her from family celebrations, leading to nationwide discussions about stepmothers' rights and responsibilities in Chinese society. Perhaps most moving was the story of Isabella Martinez from Mexico City. Her grandmother had refused to acknowledge Isabella's adoption after her parents died, insisting she wasn't real family since she wasn't biologically related. At 15, Isabella used Marcus's documentation protocols to create a comprehensive record of her grandmother's exclusionary behavior, then presented it alongside evidence of how the family's love and support had helped her thrive despite her tragic losses. "Abuela," Isabella had said during a family dinner, "you've been grieving the granddaughter you think you lost. But I'm here. I'm your real granddaughter, not because of blood, but because of choice, love, and years of shared memories. Stop mourning what never was and start celebrating what is." The transformation in the Martinez family was so profound that Isabella's grandmother became an advocate for adoptive families' rights in Mexico, eventually testifying before the Mexican Congress about the importance of legal protections for non-biological family relationships. These stories fuel Marcus's continued work, but they've also taught him about the importance of sustainable activism. At 21, he's already experienced burnout twice and has learned to balance global advocacy with personal wellness and family time. He's developed what he calls regenerative justice, the practice of creating change while maintaining the emotional and physical health necessary for long-term impact. I learned from my mother, Marcus explained during a recent interview with Oprah, that you can't pour from an empty cup. My effectiveness as an advocate is directly connected to my well-being as a person. That's why the Institute has mandatory wellness protocols for all our advocates, especially the young ones. The Institute offers meditation programs, counseling, services, and regular retreats where advocates can process the emotional weight of constantly confronting discrimination and trauma. Marcus practices what he preaches, maintaining strict boundaries around his work schedule and prioritizing time with his own found family. Victoria, now in her 70s, has become one of Marcus's most important advisors and emotional supports. Their relationship, once hostile, has evolved into something beautiful and unexpected. She often accompanies him on speaking tours, offering the perspective of someone who had to confront her own prejudices later in life. During a recent conference in London, Victoria shared their joint platform. Marcus saved our family by refusing to accept our worst behaviors. But he also saved us with patience, giving us room to grow and change. That's the model we try to follow at the Institute. Accountability with compassion, truth-telling with grace. The financial impact of the Institute's work has been substantial. Studies show that families who undergo successful inclusion transformations report higher satisfaction rates, lower conflict levels, and stronger intergenerational bonds. The economic benefits include reduced family therapy costs, fewer legal disputes over inheritance and custody, and increased productivity as family members are freed from the emotional drain of exclusion and conflict. Marcus has also pioneered the concept of inclusion economics, the study of how family discrimination affects broader economic systems. His research demonstrates that societies with higher rates of inclusive family structures show stronger social cohesion, reduced crime rates, and greater innovation in arts and technology. When families function as true meritocracies of love and support, rather than hierarchies of birth order and blood relation, Marcus argues in his latest research paper, they produce more confident, capable, and creative individuals who contribute more to society. This work has attracted attention from world leaders seeking to address social cohesion challenges in their own countries. Marcus has consulted with governments in Sweden, Costa Rica, and New Zealand about implementing family inclusion policies at national levels. But perhaps the most meaningful development has been the establishment of the Next Generation Leadership Council at the Institute. This board of 25 young people from around the world, all under 18, helps guide the Institute's priorities and programs. They ensure that the organization continues to center youth voices and perspectives in all its work. The Council's youngest member, 8-year-old Molly Okafor from Canada, no relation to the Nigerian family mentioned earlier, was excluded from Indigenous family ceremonies by relatives who questioned her mixed heritage. Using age-appropriate versions of Marcus's techniques, she documented how the exclusion was affecting not just her, but her younger siblings. Her presentation to the Tribal Council led to new policies ensuring that all children with tribal lineage are welcomed regardless of mixed heritage. Molly reminds us, Marcus says fondly, that you're never too young to advocate for justice, and you're never too old to learn from someone younger than you. The Institute has also launched an educational curriculum called Found Family Studies that's being piloted in progressive schools worldwide. The program teaches children about different family structures, the history of family inclusion and exclusion, and practical skills for addressing discrimination and building inclusive communities. Early results from pilot programs are remarkable. Schools report significant decreases in bullying related to family structure, increased empathy among students from different backgrounds, and greater support for classmates experiencing family transitions like divorce, adoption, or foster placement. Marcus's personal life has flourished alongside his professional success. He's in a committed relationship with Alex Chen, a social entrepreneur working on youth housing initiatives. They met during a found family symposium, where Alex was presenting their work creating inclusive housing for LGBTQ+ youth who've been rejected by biological families. Alex understands the work because they live it, Marcus explains. They know what it feels like to create your own family when the one you were born into can't accept who you are. Our relationship is built on shared values and mutual respect for each other's missions. James and I often marvel at the young man Marcus has become. The quiet, observant child who once stood up in a church and changed our family's trajectory has grown into a global leader whose work touches millions of lives. But he's never lost the core qualities that made him special: his empathy, his strategic thinking, and his unwavering belief in people's capacity for growth. During our most recent family Christmas dinner, now an annual celebration that includes dozens of families the Institute has helped unite, Marcus stood to give the blessing. His words captured everything our journey has meant. I'm grateful for a family that learned to grow. I'm grateful for institutions that gave us frameworks for accountability and change. I'm grateful for every person who's ever felt excluded and decided to fight for inclusion instead of giving up. I'm grateful for the truth that families aren't just born, they're built every day through choices to see each other's worth, to make space for each other's stories, and to keep choosing love even when it requires change. The blessing was followed by the reading of our annual Inclusion Report, a tradition Marcus started years ago where we reflect on how we've continued to grow as a family. This year's report highlighted William's work mentoring immigrant entrepreneurs, Victoria's Scholarship Fund for first-generation college students from multicultural families, and the continuing expansion of our family to include not just biological and legal relatives, but chosen family members who share our values of inclusion and justice. As I look at Marcus now, preparing for the next phase of his advocacy work, I'm struck by how the pain of exclusion he experienced as a child has been transformed into a global movement for inclusion. He's proven that healing doesn't mean forgetting where you came from. It means ensuring that others don't have to experience the same struggles you did. The Global Found Family Institute is expanding into conflict resolution, with plans to work with war-torn communities where ethnic and religious divisions have torn families apart. Marcus believes the same principles that healed our family can help heal societies divided by difference. At the end of the day, Marcus said in his most recent keynote address, every conflict comes down to the same basic human need: the need to be seen, valued, and included in the story. Whether it's a stepchild being excluded from family photos or ethnic groups being marginalized in society, the solution is always the same. Create systems that make inclusion more powerful than exclusion, that reward bridge building over wall building, that celebrate what we gain from diversity rather than mourning what we imagine we lose. As our family story continues to unfold, I'm reminded daily that the small voice willing to speak truth to power can indeed change the world. Marcus didn't just save our family, he's helped save thousands of families worldwide, and his work has only just begun. The Institute's newest initiative, launching next year, will create inclusion embassies in major cities worldwide, spaces where excluded family members can find support, resources, and community while working toward reconciliation and recognition in their own families. Marcus often ends his presentations with the same message that began our transformation. You don't have to accept less than you deserve. You don't have to stay invisible. Your family story doesn't end with exclusion. It begins when someone brave enough speaks up and demands to be seen. That Christmas dinner 8 years ago was the beginning of everything. But looking at the global movement Marcus has created, at the thousands of families who've been reunited and healed, at the children worldwide who now have tools to advocate for themselves, I know that the most important chapters of this story are still being written. And they're being written by young voices refusing to accept a world where love is conditional on conformity, where family is defined by fear rather than affection, and where belonging is earned through erasure of authentic self rather than celebration of full humanity. The excluded child who documented his own discrimination didn't just demand justice for himself. He created a pathway for every excluded person to find their way home to families that choose love over limitation, inclusion over isolation, and transformation over stagnation. That's the legacy of that one brave moment when a 12-year-old boy decided his family could be better and refused to settle for anything less. And that legacy grows stronger every day, with every family that chooses to grow, every child that finds their voice, and every heart that opens to love without conditions. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.